How do we think about sharing the good news? I want to submit to you that there are two basic approaches, and one is the subtle approach, the hinting at the good news through poetry, abstract art, fictional stories, and music. So, for example, T.S. Eliot, in his work as a poet in the Four Quartets published in 1943, he says that humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future, what might have been and what has been, point to one end which is always present. And he's saying that it is a vast God and God's work is something overwhelming, and human beings cannot bear very much reality. So we cannot give to them in drinking from the fire hose, that sort of thing. He says, men's curiosity searches past and present. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time. There are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood is incarnation. So what he's saying there is he's saying, being able to see God in the world, the incarnation, he says, all we can see is just moments. He says the unattended moment. It's going to surprise us. Hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. And then he goes on to say, for most of us, this is the aim, never here to be realized, who are only undefeated because we have gone on trying. So we are to do it. Be open to God's presence, God's movement in subtle ways. And so what he did through poetry was to try to articulate in subtle ways God's work in the world, God's incarnation, God in flesh in the world. And I like also later in the Four Quartets how he says that we should communicate with every phrase and sentence that is right, the common word exact without vulgarity, the formal word precise but not pedantic, unquote. And what he's saying here is he's saying if you say a truth really in a vulgar way or a pedantic way, like a lecturing kind of way, in a too direct of a way, it's not attractive. People don't want to hear it. It's not even in keeping with the actual truth that you're trying to convey. So you can ruin something by saying, you should love Jesus. Jesus is great. Jesus is who should be your Lord. But to convey that to people will not be received from them. It just is not a very effective way to do so. Another very abstract approach would be somebody like Makoto Fujimura, who does this abstract art where you can't tell whatever it is. It looks like, to the untrained eye, some person just put a bunch of blue and black paint all over a canvas, and they say, okay, this is art. And you would not be able to perhaps discern that he is getting at something profound. But he is putting enough there where he's trying to draw you in to think. So he even has abstract paintings called Prodigal God, where the generous God, and he is getting that from Tim Keller's book by that name, The Prodigal God, about the generous father. And he writes this. He says, the title of this work, based on a well-known tale of the lost son in Luke 15, is taken from my pastor Timothy Keller's book, Prodigal God. The visual complexity of the work depicts my own inner struggle between legalism of religion, the elder brother, and the recklessly spendthrift nature of the father's love in the story. In the art world and culture in which we celebrate the wayward, but not having the language to bring the lost, myself included at times, back home, these series of works probe deeply into the tension that exists within my own heart to love deeply in spite of the legalism and the waywardness that prevails in the wider culture. And that's all from this very abstract painting, but he is trying to invite people who could not hear, hey, Jesus is Lord, the Father loves you, but they might be able to be drawn in somehow by his abstract art. I think also of somebody like U2. They played this song Magnificent when the iPhone 6 was released. I know that was a long time ago, but the song has this line, only love can leave such a mark. And it's really a song that subtly, but not that subtle, really talks about how God is this wonderful creator and sustainer. So, Bono sings, I was born to sing for you. I didn't have a choice but to lift you up and sing whatever song you wanted me to. I give you back my voice from the womb. My first cry was a joyful noise. Only love can leave such a mark, but only love can heal such a scar. Justified till we die, and I will magnify. Magnificent. It's quite interesting that somebody like U2, that band where Bono's a Christian, some of their songs can be interpreted in terms of eros love, in terms of romantic love between two people, rather than, and sometimes they are, but some songs are also songs about God or about the Holy Spirit. She moves in mysterious ways. So why would U2 do that? Why wouldn't they just say these songs that, the Holy Spirit moves in mysterious ways? Well, you might say, well, they want to make more money or something like that. They want to, reach a secular audience. And so that's why they're doing it. But isn't it also that even Christians can be drawn in because of more subtle expressions of the truth rather than kind of hitting us over the head with a sledgehammer? As I love what T.S. Eliot just said, vulgar or pedantic, not vulgar or pedantic. Similarly, I think about J.R.R. Tolkien and his long book, The Lord of the Rings, and how he was trying to emulate and to try to have the reader experience a sense of the beauty of happy endings, of people's longing for a happy ending. He says that that's the eucatastrophe, not a catastrophe, but a thankful ending, a happy ending. So that's behind what he's trying to do in a book like that, to try to cultivate a sense of don't people long for happy endings? What if that happy ending really is true? Whether that happy ending that we sense is true really corresponds with the nature of reality. He says, in the eucatastrophe, we see a brief vision that the answer may be greater. It may be a far-off gleam or echo of evangelium, or evangelium in the real world. That's the good news in the real world. I would venture to say that approaching the Christian story from this direction, it has long been my feeling, a joyous feeling, that God redeemed the corrupt making creatures, men, in a way fitting to this aspect. So those are subtle approaches. And I hope that you will not see those as, kind of a wimpy, kind of approach to sharing the good news, but rather we need this. We need the poetry, the music, the stories that convey the good news in a way that's more subtle and hinting. Now, of course, the other side is this explicit approach, nonfiction writing and preaching, and that helps people make the connections between these hints that they feel and the story, which makes the hint make sense. So somebody like Sarah Grove says in her song Conversations, we've talked all about all of these issues. She's talking with her friend about all kinds of things. But she says, I haven't really mentioned that Jesus Christ is really what brings all of these things together, which you and I agree with and that we're on the same page about. And I just want to kind of mention that that's actually what, for me, helps it all hang together. So she says, I don't know how to say this. I don't know where to stand. I don't know where to put my feet or where to put my hands. I've got them in my pockets. My fingers are freezing cold. They're wrapped around this ticket stub that's 4 weeks old, and I don't know how to say this. I think we figure out this world is bigger than you and I. We've exhausted our wealth and knowledge, have no more answers for mankind, and we've had every conversation in the world about what is right and what has gone all bad. But have I mentioned to you that this is all that I am, that this is all I have, that I'm not trying to judge you? No, that's not my job. I'm just a seeker too in search of God. Then she later says, and I would like to share with you what makes me complete. I don't claim to have found the truth, but I know it has found me. The only thing that isn't meaningless to me is Jesus Christ and the way he set me free. And this is all I have, and this is all I am. So Sarah there is trying to make connections between all these conversations about, let's say, art, about poetry, about music, about movies. I just have found out that the Ant-Man director, Scott Derrickson, he's also a Christian and trying to make stories and that have this redemptive theme that lead people to wondering about redemption. Well, Sarah says in this song, she's trying to make the connection to her friend about how these come together. So there is a part where we're doing that. So I think about Tim Keller's nonfiction books. We are trying to help people to understand more clearly what is the Christian point of view? What is the Christian perspective? We've talked before about how Christianity has wonderful explanatory power, that when you put on the glasses of Christian faith, all of these other things often come into focus. So, but that is different, I think, from what somebody says. So are you talking about proselytizing? And maybe that word is used in a real range of ways. There's a book by Elmer John Thiessen called The Ethics of Evangelism, a philosophical defense of proselytizing and persuasion. And he has a whole list of unethical proselytizing. And he admits that the word proselytizing has acquired a widespread pejorative connotation. So he's trying to redeem the word, and he says, I'm using evangelism or missions or the making of religious converts as synonyms for religious proselytizing. Now, I wouldn't do that myself. I would avoid proselytizing. This is just my advice to you. Because I think it does have too pejorative a content. We don't need to use that word. Because the distinction that Pope Francis makes, Pope Francis is down on the word proselytizing, even though he thinks evangelism is a good thing. So is Leslie Newbigin. Leslie Newbigin, I think, is really helpful in this. He says that proselytism is the attempt to enlarge itself by manipulating those unable to resist. Yikes. I'll read that again. Proselytizing is the attempt to enlarge itself by manipulating those unable to resist. Ooh, we definitely don't want to do that. That is unethical. That is wrong. But Newbigin says evangelism, he says, that's freedom of the Holy Spirit doing a new thing. And I like the distinction he makes there, because when I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to have them try to understand how, as a Christian, I might see something and that they might say, oh, that actually makes some sense. That's sort of what I'm going for, trying to have them understand better where I'm coming from. And I'm not trying to say to them, I want notches on my belt. I'm trying to make you like me, to wear a jacket, sport jacket like me, and to look like me. That's not my point at all. My point is that God may want to do something in your life, something new that I can't even expect. And I like that openness, and I think that's the difference which we're trying to do when we're communicating the good news to people. I do think that it's okay to try to say, to make a case, to be persuasive, to try to say, okay, all right, I'll listen to you, and now you listen to me. We'll just take turns, and we'll explain how we see things. I think that's appropriate. Another word that I just want to warn you about is the word apologetics, because it also has this kind of defensive kind of connotation in a lot of settings. I think it's fine if you want to try to redeem it and try to say something like John Stackhouse calls it a humble apologetics, but oftentimes apologetics has this kind of I'm going to beat you in debate and I'm going to slam you, and I'm going to dunk on you, and I'm going to bring you to your knees in debate by outsmarting you. Stackhouse says that sometimes we win the battle, we lose the war. Like we actually lose friendship with the person because we've been so nasty in our logical debating. So instead, I think we want to be communicating the good news in a gracious way. So evangelism, another word I want to warn you about. Any ism is something you don't have to accept, I would say. So evangelism was only coined in the 16th century. It's not in the Bible. I don't know that we need to use that word. Isms are almost always bad because they're totalitarian. They exclude other things. They say you got to focus only on this. So I think we do need to use the New Testament word of communicating the good news to outsiders. But we don't have to use the word evangelism if that's not useful. So this is in the New Testament in Acts 26. Paul says that he is called by Jesus to be a servant and witness of what he has seen, and he is a sent person. So those are some other kind of synonyms for what we are called to do. Now, there are a couple other misconceptions about what evangelizing means. So one of them is that it is something that has nothing to do with social justice. But when we see, for example, in Luke 4:18, when Jesus comes and reads the prophecy about himself, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me to proclaim good news to the poor." So already you see a connection where the good news should be happy news also to the poor. It moves beyond verbal witness. It is good news. So similarly, as I sometimes say that, even if you vow to only preach the good news and do verbal proclamation, if somebody has a need, a physical need that you can alleviate, the good news should be too strong for you that you say, oh, well, I'm going to do good and help this person if I can. That's part of it, and it shouldn't be seen as different. So communicating the good news is also doing things. And then also another misconception is that it's only to non-Christians. Whereas Paul says, writing to some Christians in Rome, I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome, Romans 1:15. In this case, Paul is not addressing unbelievers, but Roman Christians whose faith is already known throughout the world. Romans 1:8, that's what we see from Dean Fleming makes that point in his book, Recovering the Full Mission of God. Another misconception about evangelism or evangelizing is that communicating the gospel is often translated preaching. What happened in the King James Version and also Luther's German vernacular translation of the New Testament is they translated just about every form of communication as preach. So in the King James Version, and Darrell Gruder makes this point in Be My Witnesses, in the King James Version, 14 different Greek terms are translated as preach or preaching, while in Martin Luther's German Bible, 33 Greek terms are translated as predigen or predit. There is too often in a lot of translations where it should be translated communicating the gospel, it's preaching the gospel. And in our mindset, our modern mindset, we think about preaching as behind a pulpit or with a megaphone on a corner of the public square. And that is, as you know, it should not be the only way you think about communicating the good news. Evangelism does not just mean to preach. So again, there are different translations. The NRSV also used proclaim as a translation of this, but proclaim, that doesn't help me either. Proclaim reminds me of somebody in Robin Hood or something where the king is giving a proclamation and they are, the proclamation of the king. And that's not really what we're doing either. And then another, but some translations also translate this announce. So announce is okay as well, announcing the good news, but I think about like the announcements over the school announcements in the morning for kids in high school or in elementary school, today's good news, or the announcements. So that's probably not the right way we want to think about how to communicate the good news. And that is not the way I think even it was done at that time when in the New Testament, that we don't see proclamations and announcements and preaching, even in the New Testament context, where you see Jesus or the apostles doing this work. So instead, I think the better way to understand the good news when we are conveying the good news in modern English is to say we're sharing with good people that sharing the good news that they have won a contest, or we're letting them know that they've won something, or we're excited to tell them that they've got the job. Or tell people that they're pregnant and they're excited about it, share with you. So also let me say about this word good newsing, or sharing the good news, is that in modern English, according to my little research, that the way this is most often used, the word good news, is that people say, they say, on the one hand, the good news is this. On the other hand, the bad news is this. And so I think that is also instructive for us as we think about communicating the good news to people. People don't want to be duped or fooled by advertising. They want kind of an honest presentation of what the good news is and what the bad news is. So what about like street preaching, door-to-door preaching? Just a couple comments about that. One thing is a really kind of disturbing image here, but I want to share it with you because I think it's important. Margaret Atwood, in her book, Bluebird's Egg and Other Stories, she says, religious people made her nervous. They were like men in raincoats who might or might not be flashers. Ooh, it's really yucky. A flasher is somebody like with a raincoat and they're naked underneath there and they flash people. And the idea, she says, is religious people made her nervous. They were like men in raincoats who might or might not be flashers. In other words, they might reveal too much too quickly in an inappropriate way. And I think one reason we have that reputation is that we have grown up with, I think, some proof texts in the New Testament that really urge us not to be socially appropriate. That evangelism is only done when you are being bold and taking a risk and being socially inappropriate. So it doesn't count unless you've taken a risk or dared something. And I say instead, oftentimes I have students in my class who say, I'm not an evangelist, I'm not really an evangelist, I don't like, awkward conversation, I don't like talking to strangers about weird things. And I say to them, you are probably the evangelist. You're tuned in socially to people's feelings and thoughts. You're probably a good evangelist. And there's people who say, I'm an evangelist. I love evangelism. I think, oh my goodness, this person is probably not a very good evangelist because they, are off-putting to everybody they're around. But they've felt somehow encouraged or supported or praised for being that way in this certain context. Now, let me look just briefly at a couple verses where we get this idea. So one is Ephesians 6:19. Pray also for me that whenever I speak, words may be given to me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. But a better translation, I would say, the Greek word here, or Greek phrase for fearlessly, or sometimes also translated boldly, is enparesia. And a better translation, I think, is clearly or simply. So rather, Paul's praying that he might be clear, simple, rather than boldly or fearlessly. So he's doing so without tricks. Now, why do I say that? Well, in John 16:29, yes, a different book of the New Testament, so that's a fair pushback, but we see the same phrase, enparesia, and Jesus' disciples say, now you are speaking clearly, enparesia, and without figures of speech. So they're saying, we get it. So that is really the point, that he's now kind of speaking more clearly or straightforwardly about these things. And another instance is in John 18:20, where Jesus says, I've spoken openly, parousia, to the world. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. So it's in opposition to like a secret kind of thing, or an underhanded kind of thing. So I think it's a real problem when we take this whole idea of, I got to be bold, I got to be bold, I got to be bold. And actually, the point is to be transparent and to say to a non-Christian, here's where I'm at. This is what I'd say, to be trustworthy. All right, and another proof text which gives us this idea that we need to be inappropriate socially is 1 Thessalonians 2:2. We had suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared en peri siametha to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. But rather than daring being the right word, it's not confrontational, really. The connotation is rather sincerity, authenticity, vulnerability, forthrightness, and honesty. Rather, the idea here is, we came to you on our knees. We came to you just, with our hearts on our sleeves, just trying to be helpful to you. That's what Paul's saying here. He's not saying we dared, we got in your face and we told down you, even though, you didn't want to hear it. That's not at all what's happening here. Instead, we are to be savvy. We are to use the gifts we are given, our social skills, our social intuition. Those are not things to, take a drink of, something. I always feel like, in these evangelism exercises that people do on the beach or with strangers, it's like, all right, take a drink, and all right, I'm going to go over and talk to them now, or something like that. I'm going to reduce my inhibitions and I'm going to go and do this inappropriate thing. And instead, I think we need to be gracious and use our social skills. And a final example here is of a proof text is Mark 8:38. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. And so again, people say, I will not be ashamed of the gospel. I will not be ashamed of Jesus. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to speak at the top of my lungs in this busy public area or whatever. But the wider context that Jesus is frustrated at, what he's warning them about, is Peter not appreciating that Jesus' way is not the road to fame and power, but the road to the cross. So just before that is the incident where Jesus says the Son of Man must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciple, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So Jesus is really mad in that whole incident with Peter saying there's no suffering involved. You don't need to go to the cross. Don't go. So in that sense, we are to give people the truth where they say, if somebody were to say, is the health and wealth gospel really true that once everything, once I come to Jesus, everything will be perfect and easy for me? And if you say yes, I think that's where Jesus would be on you and say, oh, no, you can't, now you're being ashamed of the Son of Man because the Son of Man was crucified. Not everything goes great in the short term for Christians. So that's really the context here. So I think there's some reason, again, to communicate in a way that is appropriate. And so final comments here just about these common questions I get about street preaching and door-to-door preaching. I actually think door-to-door, I have been kind of against that in the past a bit, but having seen people come for elections to the door and for primaries to come to the door and talk to people, I think, I guess that's still a method that is used today in modern communication, where people knock on the door and they say, hey, can I talk to you about my candidate? So I guess I'm basically just trying to be open to the fact that I think conceivably that could still possibly be some way of doing it. I'm just trying to give an analogy to other kinds of appropriate communication. I also think some people just hate solicitors, right? And so you got to be sensitive to that. No soliciting, and they're going to be mad if you come to your door. Another one is the street preaching. And the one I think about this, I think about how some comedians and also some bands play in bars. And they talk about how they're trying to get the attention of these people who are basically there to drink and to talk with their friends. And so they're having to be winsome, they're having to be funny, they're having to be really good, and that kind of wins the attention of the public who are kind of standing there. I think about buskers, those people who like juggle or do things on the street to try to get, and I think, so therefore, that's more what you need to be. And I think all of this is analogous as well to what we do on social media. So whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or on Facebook or Twitter, where we need to be attractive and trustworthy. And in that way, yes, it's not going to be, again, the most attractive thing to be vulgar and pedantic. As T.S. Eliot said, instead, we're going to want to be more subtle. We're going to be like that comedian or that band where we're trying to be so good that people are like, oh man, that person is funny. They are fun to listen, or fun, or smart, or thoughtful, or really authentic, and that's what attracts me. So I'm just trying to give you some grasp of how to be tuned into the social dynamics of communication, and I think that's what we need to be doing as Christians today when we think about communicating the good news.